For this week's IG Trading the Markets podcast, we're talking electric vehicles. There's been a substantial rise in the stock of Tesla of late, in fact driving it to record high after record high. Where it ends remains to be seen. But what is of interest, though, is where Tesla sits in the electric car revolution and whether this really is the future. For joining me now to discuss electric vehicles is Vicky Parrott, Associate Editor of DrivingElectric.com, one of the definitive guides to electric and hybrid motoring. The company also produces a quarterly magazine. Vicky, good to talk to you. Thanks indeed for joining us. I know you produce a quarterly magazine as well as you have a very active website. But I wanted to ask you, first of all, what is it that is on offer here? My view is that electric vehicles are expensive. They don't last sufficiently long on a single charge. And of course, the big one is it takes time to recharge once the battery is depleted. Why would anybody want one of these, what I perceive to be first generation vehicles?
Well, I think your views probably tally with a number of other people out there. A lot of the average motorists probably feel much the same, but the reality is that electric cars, although still more expensive to buy because they're much cheaper to run, the life costs these days are actually averaging out as quite a bit cheaper than even an efficient petrol car in a lot of instances, especially with new cars like the Peugeot e-208, the Vauxhall Corsa E, the Renault Zoe. The costs of them are coming down quite quickly, so it's going to be cheaper in the long run to run, let alone as a company car, because obviously the company car costs are extremely low as of April this year, in fact, virtually free. And not only that, but they're much cleaner, they're much greener, so there are all sorts of reasons that people might actually want to buy them. Not only that, but they're really lovely to drive as well, so that's not to be overlooked.
Well, let's ask you the question then about that. What vehicle do you drive? Are you fully electrified now in your household?
Well, I do. I run electric cars of all different kinds because of my job with driving electric. So I've run a Kia e-Niro long-termer, which is a pure electric car. I did about 9,000 miles in that in 6 months. Currently, I run a plug-in hybrid diesel car, actually, a Mercedes E-Class. So I run all kinds of different electric cars.
How do you get round this issue, though, about the fact that cars don't last very long on the road in one charge?
Well, it's a bit of an overstated issue with electric cars, because the reality is that while there are a lot of people out there whose lifestyles won't currently suit an electric car, there are vast swathes of the UK's motoring public who could very easily live with an electric car if they can charge at home. The average sort of mileage that they do, they're never really going to even need to use a public charger. And when they do, actually, they're more numerous than you might imagine, and they're very easy to use. So it is something you have to get used to with electric cars, and I'm not stating that it's faultless, because if you want to do a long journey in an electric car, probably you are going to need to plan it a bit more than you certainly would need to with a petrol or diesel car. But the reality is that the vast majority of people just charge at home. I think about 3% of charging is done on public chargers. So it's a very different reality living with an electric car than sort of comes across in the media, I think.
I have heard some very interesting stories actually through from estate agents saying that they are now beginning to price in a positive or a premium to those houses that do have an electric charger, which I find interesting. When you install that, I mean, presumably when you charge it at home, what do? You have a lead that comes out of your house and just plugs straight into the car that way?
Well, I just have my home wallbox is installed by BP ChargeMaster, who's one of the big companies that will install home chargers. You get Pod Point as well. There's all sorts of companies that will do it. It's fairly easy. So you have to send over your details. Provided you are buying an electric car or you have an electric company car, or you're buying a used car as well, this is valid for, you also get a discount on a home wallbox. So they cost about between about £300 and £500. And then you get an engineer out and they install mine in a couple of hours, and that was it. And then you have a proper official car charger on the side of your house, and it's as easy as that.
And is that a trickle charger, or is that a charger that gives you a quick boost, which gives you a lot of mileage under your belt quickly?
So, well, effectively, it's a trickle charger. So it's what's called a 7 kilowatt charger, which is most standard home wall boxes, which will charge the average electric car in around about 8 hours, 7 or 8 hours.
Okay, let's move on to this issue of carbon footprints. We're hearing a lot about the fact that governments now want to bring in electric vehicles because they are under what I believe to be an assumption that the carbon footprint is very different from an efficient petrol vehicle. When efficiency came through with petrol vehicles, we were all told that the air would be cleaner. Indeed, that is what's happening. But is the real bottom line story true that when you consider the entire production footprint and of course also the electricity generation, Is the carbon footprint for electric vehicles really that much lower than they are for efficient petrol vehicles?
Yeah, there are numerous reports that have looked into this, and all of them pretty much have come out with the fact that the electric car is usefully lower on carbon footprint over its life cycle than an equivalent efficient petrol car. So I don't think you can really argue with that anymore. The European Environment Agency said it's pretty much out there. And that's not to say that there aren't issues with electric cars in terms of sourcing cobalt, which is one of the precious metals that goes in the batteries. That is one of the more problematic issues with electric cars and this kind of thing, lithium as well. So there are issues with electric car production, just as there are with producing petrol and diesel cars. But definitely in terms of their environmental impact, they are substantially better than petrol or diesel cars. And that's not even taking into account that, of course, the electricity they use currently is only going to get greener as most countries certainly start turning to more and more renewable energy.
So are the targets that are being laid out now by governments, it almost seems like each government of each individual country wants to be the first to announce some really radical, quick turnaround, and they stop selling petrol vehicles within a decade or two. Are these targets realistic, do you think? Or do you think it is just a question of governments at the moment trying to talk up what they believe their achievable targets could be? For all what's said and done, the chances are the leaders of government, wherever they are in the world, today won't be around in 10 or 20 years' time when those targets are meant to be met. Do you think it's realistic that the government targets that have been put in place are those that we should really be sticking to? Or do you think ultimately they're going to have to be eased and we're going to have to see a longer turnover period between petrol and electric cars?
It is a bit difficult to give a precise sort of yes or no answer to that. I believe it is possible for the UK to be predominantly pure electric by 2035, which is obviously the most recent news that the government has come out with as a sort of proposed plan anyway. But what I think is problematic is that the government needs to be helping more to achieve that rather than just piling more and more pressure onto the motoring industry, which is already really under a lot of pressure to achieve the goals that it's been given. There are a lot of manufacturers looking at potentially huge fines with CO2 ratings that are being imposed on them and this kind of thing. So that, legislation is not making it easy for manufacturers to make money and to just exist at the moment. But having said that, I think with the uptake of electric cars, with the infrastructure actually improving quite quickly, despite what you might read about a lot in the media, I think we can be pure electric by 2035. I do think I have reservations about the idea of also banning plug-in hybrids as well, which I think is a useful sort of bridging technology and I think could be a useful solution for a lot of people. So I'm less convinced about that, but I think it is possible. I just think the government also needs to offer a lot more support in terms of giving more clarity in many ways, in terms of giving longer forecasts on the benefit-in-kind tax rates that they're going to impose on electric cars, in terms of additional funding for charging infrastructure, in terms of more clarity, in terms of the recycling of these batteries, all sorts of things that the government can do to help, that it needs to do, as well as just piling more pressure on.
Yeah, I mentioned at the top about the recent rise in the stock of Tesla. Where does Tesla sit in on this? I mean, clearly it is one of the first movers, but are they really ahead of the pack? I'm thinking recently about, well, for instance, the market capitalization of Tesla has recently passed Volkswagen. Then all of a sudden it was bigger than Volkswagen and BMW put together. Now, VW and BMW are both car manufacturers that do have an electric offering. But where do you think, in your world, Tesla sits in the wide range of electric vehicles that are now on offer?
I think Tesla has absolutely shown the way with the electric vehicle. I think because they've been so far-sighted with their technology and very sort of fearless in being so confident in electric powertrains as well from the very off, that I think they are sort of a generation ahead of a lot of the rivals. I think the traditional manufacturers like Volkswagen and the like are catching up with Tesla, certainly with new models like the ID.3 coming out and this kind of thing. But Tesla really do already have such an established, really loyal sort of following as well. And the fact that they've established such a great charging infrastructure, because Tesla has something called the Tesla Superchargers, which is a Tesla-only charging infrastructure across the UK, Europe and America. And it's a fantastic infrastructure that's very reliable, very quick. And it is one of the main reasons that you might buy a Tesla, on top of the fact that they're very long-range electric cars as well. So I think Tesla really is kind of ahead of the pack still at the moment. That's not to say the company isn't without issues, and also not to say that there aren't reasons you might buy plenty of the other electric cars out there instead of a Tesla. But they are they are certainly leaders in electric cars and also in terms of battery production. So I think they've got a lot going for them.
Yes, I know as well, of course, that Tesla has started to produce vehicles in other countries. I'm thinking China especially. I know also it's now building a plant, I believe, in Germany, just outside Berlin, because it wants the made in Germany handle. Germany, as we know, is considered a big and superior motor manufacturer if you consider all that's on offer at the moment, including petrol and diesel, of course, which is now on its way out.
Mm-hmm.
But do you think that Germany, as a motor manufacturing nation, its position is under threat because of electric vehicles, which are now being built in considerable numbers outside of Europe?
Not really. I think Germany is likely to maintain its reputation for being one of the finest car makers there is, in terms of the quality of the cars it produces, in terms of the breadth of the cars it produces. I mean, it's got Volkswagen, Mercedes, BMW, of course, all the Volkswagen brands underneath it. So it really does have some great brands, and they are coming out with some really fantastic electric cars within the next 12 months or so. So I think probably there has been a bit of a... perhaps it has given them a shock how much Tesla has eaten into the premium electric car market and how quickly. But in reality, I don't think that really is in jeopardy. I suppose the other thing to point out is that there are actually sort of invaders on the electric car market from in terms of Kia and Hyundai, who have done fantastically well with launching their electric cars very early, long-range electric cars as well. So the e-Niro and the Kona Electric will both do sort of 280 to 300 miles in real-world driving, which is pretty unprecedented in that price bracket. So they've really already set themselves up very well too. But I don't really think that there is a huge threat to the Germans in terms of their reputation, no.
Interesting. Look, Vicky, we've got to leave it there, but thanks indeed for joining us for this podcast today. IG's Trading the Markets, talking electric vehicles there with Vicky Parrott, Associate Editor of DrivingElectric.com.